Hey there team, Alexander here again, and thanks for watching another video. Today we're going to talk about Redux, and I'm right here in my remote office, just starting the video from a different kit, and then I'm going to switch to my computer. Today we're going to talk about Redux primarily because in the past couple of interviews, or actually in many interviews, my candidates who would choose actually Redux as their state management solution in a very simple code challenge, they couldn't really answer what they really like about Redux and what are the circumstances when they decide to use it. So today I've decided to, that kind of incentivized me to choose this subject for today's video. This video is going to be very pragmatic, very hands-on, so I'm going to remove all the noise, all the theory that you don't really need to know up front before you start using Redux. So I'm going to try to narrow this down to a few minutes that's truly actually needed to understand and explain Redux as well. So what you can expect from this video today, I'm going to focus on actually telling you why would you want to use Redux when you wouldn't want to necessarily use it, and then actually how to use it, what are all of those reducers and actions and state. And then over time, as you get better at when you truly internalize the pattern, then you feel free to go back in time and then focus on, okay, what is this immutability that people are talking about, etc., etc., etc. So let me switch to my other machine. Let's kind of start the actual coding video. I hope you like it, and if you do, please don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and then subscribe. I'll see you guys in a second. Peace out. Cheers. All right, team, I'm back here. You just saw me on another camera announcing what I'm about to gonna do here. So in today's video, we're going to talk about Redux. We're not going to be talking about the Redux toolkit, which is kind of a new permutation of Redux, relatively new, but that is the current version of Redux. And the main reason is, like, if you've never worked with Redux, I think it's fundamental that you actually understand just Redux, because most of the projects today, the existing legacy projects, are using Redux and not Redux toolkit. So I would like to say, if you want to start a new project yourself and you want to use Redux, of course, you want to go and use Redux Toolkit. But we're going to start this video with just Redux, and then maybe next video that I might record is going to be about Redux Toolkit, which is basically the only difference to say is it's a better interfaces, better API, and just maybe slightly less repetition than with the existing Redux we're going to do today. To introduce what we're going to do, essentially I have a simple Vite or Vite project. I've created a React project here. We're not going to be doing any React or anything related to that right now. We're going to learn Redux, and then we're going to see how we can port it then to React. And just so I can kind of give you the intro to Redux and teach you Redux, but then also show you in reality how you would actually use it in the React context, for example, and then that would apply to any other modern library. So for now, we're just going to be in this context. We're not going to be doing anything related to React. And then at the end of this video, we're going to move it to React and then see how it kind of works in a real life application, right? So today I'm going to open my to-dos here. I'm using the to-dos plugin. If you don't know what this actually is, give me 1 second. I have recently recorded a video on my VS Code extension, so find it in this channel. I might leave a video link there, but this is not the notes that I wanted. Redux notes, yeah. So basically, let's just talk for a minute before we move on to coding. So Redux basically is a state machine. It's a way to deal with your state in your application. State machine essentially is just an idea or a specific pattern with some ideas on how a specific how state should be handled. Redux is based on flux pattern. If you don't know it, Google it. This video is not going to go into detail, otherwise we're going to end up talking here for 2 hours. But Redux is a state machine. It helps you manage your state. Again, as I said, we're going to be focusing on Redux today, not on Redux Toolkit, because Redux Toolkit is still, I would say, relatively new relative to Redux. So the chances that you're going to, again, meet Redux are way higher in existing projects than Redux Toolkit. What is a short-term and long-term state? I would say that we generally would use Redux mostly for handling long-term state. A short-term state, if you're unaware, would be a value in your search input that disappears and it's no longer there once you hit an enter and stuff. But we're not going to talk in detail about it now. We're going to mention some of this stuff as we go along to this video naturally, because I'm not cutting this video. This video is not scripted or anything. So let's kind of build something together, and then we're going to figure out when and why to use what, right? So let's start. So basically, if I go back here, over here, you can actually see that I just have this draw IO diagram, very simple. The main concepts of Redux are the actions and reducers, and then you have the state, which basically usually represents your state. Action, as I like to think about it, is an intent. So it's like you describe with a JavaScript object, what do you want to do? So imagine that in a standard JavaScript library, without any fancy libraries, you have an object that has a variable a that's 0. If you would want to change that value, you would say a dot or object dot a now is 22. So essentially that would be the direct way to mutate that object's value. In Redux, we do that with actions, and action again is just an object that has a type property, as you're going to see in a second, and that type describes what that action is supposed to do. Inside of the reducers, we basically, in simple words, describe what it means for us to change X or A or whatever. So you define what does that actually mean, and then state itself is just your application state. So if we get back here, let's start. So typically in a Redux app, you would have to create a store, and that store is an object basically that contains some methods and functions, and then your state as well. So let's say create store. Did I actually install Redux? No, I didn't. So let's pnpmi Redux, and let's just pnpm dev again. So now we have the Redux, we have the create store, and this is how we create the actual store, right? So here I'm going to come and say const store is create store, and this create store takes something that's called a reducer, and we're going to talk about that now. I'm pretty sure that you've heard this a million times already, and this GitHub Copilot is messing with me a bit. And let's just here return state for now. So let's not do anything more. So let's just do this. Let's just print the store just to see if we have actually successfully created it. And then if we go back here and go to our browser here, we can see that we do indeed have some store object, and that store object has a few functions on it, a few methods, if you may: get state, subscribe, replace reducer, dispatch, and observable, right? In today's video, we're going to be using the dispatch, which is just the function that, as you can see, that takes the action and then just passes that action alongside internals of Redux. We're not going to be talking about super mega internals. You don't actually care. You just care to know how it works and how you can use it, right? So we're going to be using dispatch, and get state essentially is a function that you can call, or a method that you can call to get the actual state. So if I would actually come here now and I say console.log get store.get state, right? And if we would print this fella over here, we're going to get undefined because we indeed didn't actually create any state. So let's take this function that we like to call reducer, and let's, in this example, as always, let's do the to-do app or something like that. So let's say, let's create a function that's called to-do reducers. So literally just a plain JavaScript function, that's what a reducer actually is. We're going to pass this thing in here. And then we're going to now cover some actions. So as we said previously in this diagram over here, right, an action is your intent. So I want to change some value in my state. And then in the reducer, you describe what does that mean? Like, what do you mean change X? What does that mean in a programming sense? And let's do that. So let's create a reducer and an action. So let's first create an action, and then let's cover what does it mean to us to change something. So I'm going to create a new action here, and I'm going to say, let me just create an action that's called change X. Or no, let's create an action that's called add to do, and that's going to be an object. And I'm going to say it's going to have a type. So this is perfect, right? This is actually super nice. So we have literally action is a plain JavaScript object that always must have a type, because this type is going to be used inside of the reducers to handle each and every case, right? So we have a simple JavaScript object, which is our action now. And here now I'm going to create a switch statement. You can either use a switch or an if-else. It's completely up to you. I think it's very typical to see switch statement because it's just writing a bit fewer lines of code, right? So as you can see, we have a switch statement that we switch on the action type. We switch always on the action type, and like I said, action always has to have a type. And then inside of here now is what I say, okay, now we have to describe what the hell does it mean to add to do? Like, what does that mean to us? We can see that this state here, every time when you create a reducer, you need to give it some initial state. So here, I'm gonna say now, okay, initial state is to-dos, and it's gonna be an empty array. So this is our default initial state for this to-dos reducer, right? If I actually go to my browser now, we can see now that the state is no longer undefined. Now it's to-dos and it's an empty array. You can see it has 0 elements in it, right? So now here I have to say, hey, hey Alex, what do you mean add to do? What does that mean in a literal sense? Well, to me it means to take whatever to-dos are already there. So basically merge already the existing to-dos that exist and then add a new to-do, right? Now, I don't like that this is text, even though it's fine. I think it can infer the text from the action. So now we actually have described, this is our first case. Now we have described what does it mean for us when we say add to do. Well, it means, okay, it means push some string into an array, right? Now, this is kind of wrong because this is not what I want to do. To-dos for me should be an array of objects. So essentially, what I would like to do, let's change this add to do object a bit. So let's say text learn Redux, and let's say here to do is going to be an object that it's going to have a text and ID, let's say of 1. So now here actually I can just say to do's state.todos and then action dot, I don't know, let's call it new to do, right? Something like this. Okay. So now we have a simple action. We describe how do we handle that state change in our case, and then we now need a default clause here in our switch statement. So essentially, you always need to pass the default case because if none of the cases happen, so if you try to dispatch something where the case doesn't exist, you always have to return a default state, right? Okay, great. So let's go back here. Nothing should be different. We didn't dispatch any action. So now if I actually use my store, and we saw that the store has this dispatch method on it, if I come here and say store.dispatch, dispatch literally means call some function that takes some object that has a type, dispatch it so some of those switch statements can catch it, and then change my state. So just a lot of fancy names, but that's what it means. And now here I can say add to do, right? And boom, as you can see now, if I refresh this, if I open the to-dos, well, we have undefined, so because we messed something up, so that's not correct. Let's see, add to do, type add to do, and then to do, yeah. And then, yeah, let's actually call this, so you can see the reason why we have undefined is because this action, which is this object, doesn't have a new to do key. We named it to do here. So let's just rename it here as well. I'm naming this new to do explicitly and consciously because I want you to know that you can name your keys in your action whatever you want. This could have just as well been cow, dog, cat, and then in here it would have been cow, dog, cat, right? As you can see now, our to-dos indeed is an array of a single object that has learn Redux ID 1, right? So let's obviously not call this cow, dog, cat because it doesn't make sense. Let's just call it actually to do, right? So you can see we have some object that always has to have a type, so our switch statements can catch it, and then we're passing some JavaScript object. Again, you can pass, type is always mandatory, but then whatever else you want to pass is completely optional and up to you. Okay, great. So now we actually have a way in our state to add to-dos, right? So that is pretty great, right? Well, how can I add another one? Well, the same way, right? So here I can do this, and now I'm adding the same one, right? So now I have two same to-dos. Now, there's one problem with this. So Alex, are you saying that I have to kind of hard code this sort of stuff every single time? Is there a way to make this a bit more reusable so I can actually, pass something here that I can just maybe pass the text and then the rest of the stuff, so I don't have to, because right now if I wanted another to-do that's different, right? I would have to have add to do 2. It would still have the same type, but this would be some different text. And then this ID would be different. And then, yes, we can, and we need to create an action creator. What is an action creator? Action creator is literally the most dumbest JavaScript function that returns an object. So let's do that. So let's comment this stuff out. Let's say, you know, const add to do, but instead of making it an object, we're going to make it a function that looks exactly like this. Copilot is actually helping me here. And then in here, we're going to pass maybe the to-do text. So let's say text. We want to make it as kind of generic as possible so we don't repeat ourselves too much. And then over here, right, you can say to do, and then text is going to be whatever this what this function gets as an argument. And this ID, let's just randomly generate it for now. So let's just say mat.floor, mat.random, and let's say by, you know, 1000, right? So now we have kind of optimized this a bit. So now whenever we want to add a to-do anywhere in our application, we're going to see that later in React. We can just dispatch this thing and say here, you know, learn React and Redux. Now, the reason why this is incredibly useful is because you're going to see eventually from some input form in your application, we're going to get the value, and then we're going to call this. So if we go back here, and in case we didn't make any mistakes, you can actually see that the text is learn React and Redux. And I believe there is a little, let's see, do we have any? Okay, let's try to add another one. So we do this. So there's something wrong with our ID, and I believe that's because we mat.random +1, what was mat.floor? Yeah, we have kind of messed up this algorithm here, but let's just actually say, let's just call it mat random. It doesn't really matter, right? So we're gonna do this. So let's not get carried by those side effects. That's irrelevant completely for this thing. And now you can see we have dispatched 2 actions, and boom, they both work, right? So now we have an ability in our application to push some to-do object to our state, right? Okay, that is great. Now, awesome, right? So that's pretty good. So we have seen that the reducer is just a simple function in which you have some if or switch statement, and then you catch, let's just say catch some of the cases by the action type, and then we said that the action is just a plain object that has a type property on it that's mandatory. Everything else is optional based on whatever your action is doing, obviously, right? So, okay. So where do we go from here, right? So what do we do now? Well, generally, right, let's create a few more things. So let's say that, hey, I wanna have a remove to do as well. And what does it mean remove to do for us? What does it mean? Well, it probably means going through the existing to-dos and then filtering the one by the ID, right? So here we can say to-do.id is not equal to action.id. If you're wondering, like, how do I have a font like this and stuff, make sure to watch my video on VS Code that I recorded recently. You can find a lot of nice tips there. So what does it mean remove to do? It means this. I see. Okay, right. So if we would kind of yeah, so that's it. So this is remove to do, add to do, and let's imagine that that's kind of, if I remember what I saw from previous examples, let's just say that let's extend our to do object with completed false, because once we get to the React app, we can then build those types of things in the React application. So you can kind of, if you complete it, you can click complete, you can set this to completed, blah blah blah, right? So remove to do, add to do. Let's create another action here. Let's say mark to do as completed. Yeah, sure, why not? And then what does that mean? Well, it probably means mapping through all of the to-dos and then saying, you know, if to do ID, actually, yeah, I'm gonna actually not use a ternary. I'm gonna say if to do.id is action ID, yeah, exactly, then do this. And maybe we could, yeah, and maybe we can even be a bit smarter and just say toggle completed to do, right? So instead of setting it to true or false, we can just say take whatever the completed is now and reverse it. So we can say to do dot completed. So this will allow you to kind of toggle it on and off, right? So let's imagine for now we stop here, right? And we say, all right, Alex, so We have some actions, so we need to create those other actions now as well. So we're going to say remove to do. And remove to do is going to take the ID of the element that we want to remove from that array. So pretty much is we're just going to pass the ID. And actually here, yeah, you can see that action ID good. And then what else did we had? We had toggle completed to do, and pretty much also the same. We just pass the ID, so it's the same. So toggle completed to do, right? Okay, great. So we have those actions now. We have all the necessary cases here in the reducer. We have created the actual to-dos reducer. So what could we do now, right? So, well, I guess next step would be to maybe connect this to React, right? But before we do that, it would be super cool that we can use those Redux devtools. Redux devtools is a Chrome extension, if you don't know, that helps you enormously to debug your Redux state. It's super, super good. It's one of the main reasons why you would want to even use this. So how do we configure this? So just as I've put in my notes, we need to install this Redux DevTools extension, right? I think I've opened it somewhere here already. Yes. So in order to kind of make sure that our application is using this extension, right, we need to install it. So let's do that together. So I'm going to grab this thing. I'm using pnpm. So I'm going to say pnpm I, Redux DevTools extension. I'll run my stuff again. I don't need and it seems we have some, we'll fix that in a second. So the only thing we really need to do is we need to, let's just grab this from here. Let's go back. I think I have add to do declared twice somewhere. Yes. So let's call this remove to do. It was complaining about that. And yeah, let's get here. Let's paste this. Let's remove this. And then as we saw, the create store itself function that we use to create our initial store here. As you can see, it takes the reducer as the first argument, and then it takes some middleware as the second argument. And the middleware basically, just like if you're aware of the concept of a middleware, for example, from Express.js or any other technology, is just a way to extend the functionality, in this case of Redux. So middleware, basically think of it as plugins or extensions. You can pass this to Redux when you're creating the store and then extend the Redux functionality. This is not about going into super mega detail, and it should be very honest with you, you actually don't care at all about it. So I'm gonna remove this and I'm gonna do this. And already now, just by adding this compose with DevTools, we should actually have developer tools working for us. If I refresh, hopefully, I don't actually know. Let's see if we're missing something. And I think I've zoomed way too much. Okay, it is complaining about something. Let's see what. Reducer is not defined. Of course not. So obviously, we forgot to put this below over here, right? So it's going to be to do reducers. There we go. So now if we get back here, the error should be gone. And if we go to the Redux store, now we have this really, really amazing tool to work with. So why is this tool so amazing, and why am I praising it so much? The reason why Redux is amazing, and a reason why you hear this immutable this, immutable that constantly, is that whenever you make a change in Redux store, you're not really mutating, or that's just a fancy word, you're not directly changing the existing object. For every state transition, basically, you are getting a new state. And because of that, they were able to build this really amazing tool to enable you to literally have a timeline and follow everything in your app and how it changes. So you can see here, for example, if I check my state at this point, at the start, right before my app was initialized, you can see my to-dos here in the state were empty. Then when I added a to-do here, boom, oh wow, now I can see this has changed. Ah, I see. So when I called this add to-do, this was done. I can also see the difference between the state before and now. So you can see before to-dos was empty, and now there's this object on a position of 0 in that array. And then if I click on the next one, you can see the diff now is at the position of 1 of this to-dos array, there's a new one. If I actually go to action here, I can see all the data and both of those items we've added. So really, really powerful. You can, as you saw me doing, you can see, you can click here on the action to see what the action carried. So you have an action that has a type of add to do. You have the to do object. You can check on the state. So this state view shows you the whole state. You can also go into the chart and see how your state is composed. You can go into raw and see your entire state. So incredibly, incredibly, incredibly useful thing. You absolutely must be using this. Of course, I'm not going to go into every single thing here. There's a bunch of stuff here, but what you're going to be in reality using the most is going to be this view exactly here. And you're going to be fiddling between, okay, I want to know what my action actually carried. So for example, sometimes you're going to be thinking that you're passing something to your action that you're not. Then you're going to see, okay, I've dispatched add to do. Did I actually pass here what I thought? And then you're going to see, my UI is passing completed as true and should be false. So I have a bug. Or, the ID is not generated properly, or the text is not, my input didn't work. I didn't get the value. So you can use this in various ways to see, is your state changing according to what your UI is actually doing, right? So this is basically how we've just enabled those tools. Super simple. You just install the extension, you pass it here as the second argument, and you're done. Amazing. Okay. So now at this point, of course, we're going to do more Redux, but let's maybe try to make this more realistic, right? Because so far we're just printing some values in the console. We're taking a look at the Redux, the devtools and stuff. It's very hard to find meaning because it feels very bottom-up approach of teaching, right? So let's try to, so how would we take this thing now and how would we put this inside of React application, for example, right? Just as you have drivers in your computer for your, GPU, CPU, your audio cards, so they can interact with your system, same thing is with Redux. Redux is basically framework agnostic library, so you can use it with nearly anything, but you need to always install the corresponding library for those things. So for example, in the context of React application that we actually have here, like super simple boilerplate, we need to install some library that deals with that. And what is the name of that library? Well, you can guess it, react-redux. So let's install that right now here. So we're going to say p npm I react redux, hit enter. Amazing. Run our development server again. And now let's expose our whole application to React, let's expose our Redux store to our whole application, our whole React application. So what we're going to do basically, I don't actually even remember, let's say import, because again, you do this once per project, so this is not something that you do too much. So we're going to need some sort of provider, right? And let's call it, let's just call it, let's call it a provider, it's fine, if I remember well. And as you can see, this provider takes the store as an argument. So I'm sorry if you're not a React developer, but I highly advise you to keep watching because this is going to be almost identical in Vue.js, Angular. Each one of those libraries, they have corresponding drivers for them. So even if you're not, this is not going to be some complex React code. So no matter what UI library you're using, I'm pretty sure you're going to be able to follow up. So you pass this provider and then it expects the store, right? So we're going to use the store here and we need to import the store, right? So what I'm actually going to do now, I'm going to remove this learn Redux thing because this was just a wrapper so we can actually keep testing stuff together. But what I'm actually going to do now, I'm going to export this store. And we're going to prettify this structure later. As you can see, I explicitly wrote everything in a single file so you can follow up easier. So let's stay here and then we're going to clean this up later. So now I'm going to actually import my store. And now actually my React should have access to the store. Let me just fix one thing up because here I was calling this learn Redux. So let's make sure that we're not getting any errors. And let's actually go here. So we have a provider. We have actually wrapped it here. We have a store. Let me make sure that that's also fine. Yeah, we have everything here. Let's call .getState just so we can make sure that, Yeah, so we have to do is great, la la la, perfect. So now we have wrapped basically our store in a React Redux provider, right? The only thing that's a bit, yeah, and the reason why we're not getting any actions here is because we're not calling any, right? So that's perfectly fine, right? Okay, great. And let me just double check something. So we have that here, great. If we go to the state here, you can see to-dos is empty. So let's kind of, how do we use this now? So how can we use this simple store with React? Super simple. Let's actually stay with a single component. We're not going to do any complex stuff here. So first and foremost, there are two things that we need. And those both things come from React Redux library. First, we need a dispatch hook, and we need useSelector to consume the Redux store from this provider that we've just created. So let's do that. So here I'm going to say const dispatch is use dispatch. And I don't know why my auto import doesn't work. I'm pretty sure it should be working, but let's say use dispatch from React Redux. We misspelled that a bit, React Redux. And then we also need the useSelector. And then this useSelector is basically a hook from which we actually pull the data, the Redux data, right? So here we're going to say const something is useSelector. And then here we're going to say, you know, return to-dos is state.todos. And then here we're going to say to-dos. So this is how we can hook into our, because only thing we did so far, very simple, we wrapped our whole application in this React Redux provider, and now we can start pulling the data from it. So if we go ahead here and try console logging this, console.log to-dos, we can see that we actually get to-dos, which is an empty array. Beautiful, so we already have the data, right? Okay, great. So let's loop through those to-dos already. And then for each to-do, let's return, let's say a div. And then it's gonna have a to-do text. So let's say to-do.text. And here we're gonna use as a key, we're gonna use to-do.id, right? So right now we should not get anything because to-dos array is empty. So that's all expected. There's no to-dos, right? Okay, great. Well, let's now go ahead somewhere around here and let's create a form. So we're gonna create a form here. Let's create a form. Obviously no action. This is not gonna be calling anything server side. And let's have an input text and let's have a button that says add to do, right? So we have this simple thing. So what do we want to do actually? So now when I fill this in and then press add to do, we want to call the dispatch, right? So let's create let's create here const handle add to do. And then what is this going to be doing? Well, we need to grab the value from the input somehow, right? From this guy, and then we need to, you know, when we click this button, we need to call add to do. So let's do that. So here we're going to know that we're going to have dispatch. And I'm going to intentionally now do this a bit worse than usual. And then we're going to see like, hey, why are you saying type add to do? Shouldn't you use because we have actually created those actions. So in this context here, right, we should really be importing this add to do, right? So let's actually export this, sorry. And here, instead of dispatching this plain object like this, we're just gonna import that add to do, and then we're gonna pass whatever the value of the to do is, right? So let's just imagine that somewhere we're gonna be calling this handle to do. So I guess when I click on this button on click, we're gonna be calling handle add to do, and then I guess here we can have on change, and then whenever this value changes, we're gonna say, you know, I guess e.target.value, and then we're gonna have some local state. So here I'm gonna actually have const, you know, whatever text, set text, exactly. And then here I'm gonna say set text eTarget.value, right? So basically we have two different states. We have a local state to this component, and at the start of the video I was talking about this short-term state. So you will never going to be setting the state like this, like a temporary input state into Redux. So that's why this is local to this component. And let's actually also import use state. For some reason my auto completion kind of is not great here. Okay, so we have that now. Whenever now I enter some value into this input, we're calling that hook, and when I do this add to do, we should be adding stuff to. So let's actually see, are we calling it? And we are actually calling it. The only little thing that we have, we can see that this form is actually submitting, right? And it shouldn't. So let's just say here type is button. We don't actually even need the form, right? This could have been just a div as well. So let's see. And are we actually adding anything? As you can see, we are actually indeed adding those to-dos now. And if I go to the console, we can see that text is undefined, so we're probably failing to get the actual value here. So let's just do this, and let's say console.log e.current target.value, and let's see what is the problem. Yeah, so let's change this to the current target actually, and let's try that again. For some reason the text, I know, my bad, sorry, we're not actually passing the text here. So the target is actually fine, but we're not actually passing this set text here. And obviously we also want to reset the text from the input when we add a successful to-do. So we're going to say set text to an empty string. Okay, let's try that again. And what did we forget to do again? This was supposed to be a text. Okay, another attempt, let's try. And now, as you can see, we are actually adding the to-dos, right? The only thing that doesn't really work now when we call this is this set text for whatever reason isn't, and that's because our input is actually missing a value, right? So try that again, bam, 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 right? And you can see we're kind of adding to-dos. Now, if we take a look at our Redux store, you can see how it was changing. We can see the IDs that were generated. We can see the text we were adding. Okay, so since this is a Redux video, I'm not going to proceed furthermore. So this is not supposed to help you learn React. This simple example here now shows you how you can connect your Redux store to any library. In this context, React. Now, before we proceed, right, so we're done with React. You can take this example now, pull this repository and play with it. You know, maybe that would be a great assignment for you. You know, implement, some button here. So when you click it, you mark this as completed, you remove it and stuff. So this is a challenge I leave for you. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you a few more things. So for example, you can see now that this create store we have a single reducer in our application. If I go to the state, you can see that I have just to-dos, right? That's the only thing we have. Now, that's realistically not what real applications have. You're always going to have multiple reducers for different types of things. So those are also called slices, and essentially those are like pieces that describe specific states of your application. So for example, this reducer describes our to-dos. But what if you have a logged in user or something like that you want to describe that as well? Let's actually kind of do that as well. So let's imagine that we wanted to another slice of state that describes something else. Let's imagine it describes the users. So we can say const user reducer, and we're going to pretty much do the same like here. So we're going to create another additional reducer. And yeah, so that's great. Hopefully I can type, and you can imagine like I should have just copy pasted the whole thing and then just whatever, but I don't know what the hell am I doing. And let's call this user reducer or users reducer, whatever you prefer. We're gonna remove some of this stuff, And let's imagine here that you have a login action. So let's imagine that we can have our user to log in. You would basically, or maybe this should have been called authentication reducer, whatever. But let's imagine that we had needed to describe another piece of state. You would create another reducer like this. And maybe here as an initial state, you would have a user that says, I don't know, is authenticated. This is very common, false, is loading, you know, true by default. So when you come to the application, user is indeed loading. And then maybe let's just fake this thing. So let's have a login here. And what does the login mean for us? Well, it means to change the is authenticated to true. So this is hard coded. This is just to show you the case. Let's now imagine that somewhere in our React application here, we said, hey, we have this to do, is authenticated, that we can now already take from our state. And this would be state.users or user.is authenticated. So let's actually go back here and also, right? So like this, but now if we actually go back here, we can see that our application is breaking and it's like cannot read properties of undefined is authenticated. Well, one thing that you may pay attention to is that we don't actually have two reducers now. We only have a single one. We did define this, but we're not using it anywhere. So how can we pass this to create store, considering that create store only takes a single reducer as an argument? So how can we pass 2 or 15 of them? Well, we need to use some utility probably that helps us to still pass a single kind of argument here, but with multiple reducers. And if that's your assumption, you're absolutely right. Redux has something called combine reducers. And this combine reducers basically just takes, so we can say combine reducers, and that takes an object, a map, basically of multiple reducers. So in our case here, I'm gonna say to-dos reducer, and then I'm gonna say, well, to-dos reducer, we can just say it like this. And then I can also say, and I don't know why I named it reducers. It doesn't make actually any sense. Do I read it? Yeah, this should be called to-dos reducer, not reducers. So let's say to-do reducer, or like this. And then the same goes here, users reducer, right? Now we're actually passing multiple reducers to the create store. And even though this is still going to be erroring out until we fix it, you can actually see, if I go to my state, that I do indeed have two reducers here. I have to-dos reducers that has to-dos, and I have users reducers that has user and then is authenticated and is loading to true, right? Okay, great. So so that's great, right? So let's now go here in the app and fix this up. So this, we just need to change some of this stuff in relation to how we're accessing this. So here I'm gonna have to say state.todos reducer, and I guess .todos, and then here is gonna be user reducer, or users, how did we call it? I don't remember. Users, let's actually rename it to user reducer here. It feels wrong naming this one with a plural. So we do something like this. Let's see. So user reducers, yes, to-dos reducer dot to-dos. Yeah, that's good. And let's see where we are failing. Is authenticated is failing. So let's go to our main.js, app.js here. And let's say state.user reducer. So let's actually print the state here just to see where we are actually messing up. So user reducer, so yeah, that's where we're messing up. So user state.user reducer dot user dot is authenticated, and let's say here is user loading, and then it's going to be pretty much is loading, or let's just also say is loading, right? So are we still failing? We still probably have some issues. So let's take a look. DD, so we have a user reducer, reducers. So it's still called user reducers. Okay, my bad. So we need to go, it's a typo. So let's not call it reducers. I don't know how that ended up being there. We remove this. And then boom, we are back. So now the only difference is now we have multiple reducers, right? So we have this, and then we have this as well, right? Okay, great. So let's now fake it a bit. So let's just say here that, you know, so let's swap this state. So let's say here, you know, before we render this form, let's say here if is not authenticated, and we actually have to import those. So is authenticated. If it's not authenticated, return whatever, some message, right? Unauthorized, please log in. So if we get back here, right, it says unauthorized, please log in, and let's add a simple button here from which we can then dispatch the login action, right? So we're gonna just say button. It's gonna say login, and then here we're gonna say on click, and then we're gonna dispatch some action that we actually have to go and create now, right? So let's go over here. Let's go to our actions, right? So like this, and then let's say login, right? We're gonna dispatch login action, and we're not gonna be passing any data here because you can see that here we're hard coding is authenticated to true, so we don't really need anything. And now, as you may notice, we just export this. We go here, and somebody actually subscribed to my YouTube channel literally at the time of me recording this video. Pretty funny. And then yeah, as you may notice here, we're gonna say dispatch, and then login that we're gonna import, and that's it. So now if I go back here, if we did everything fine, let's see, login is authenticated is true. So let me just try to drag this thing, but we can see here that is authenticated now is true. And let's go back here. Let's get rid of this. Is authenticated, la la la. Are we actually setting the right thing though? Now let's see, state. And as you can see, we're not, right? So here we have to say user, and then state.user, and then is authenticated is set to true. So let's try that again. And boom, now you can see once I click login, we can see the diff here that, hey, the state used to be false, now it's true. And now you actually have logged in, and now you can start adding those to-dos, right? So this is how you deal with multiple reducers. And as you can see, it all makes sense because you don't want to be putting your whole entire application state into a single, truly into a single object. You want to have those kind of sub-documents, sub-objects that describe your different states. So this is related to the user, this is related to to-dos, right? Okay, so we're gonna truly now stop with the React part. So I'm gonna close that. So we're not gonna be writing any more React. So you can see here now basically that that I've done everything in a single file, right? And this kind of is not very pretty. So what I generally do, right, is I have a directory here called store in general, and then I break those resources down into whatever they represent. So for now here we saw that we have a user, so we have users, and then we have to-dos, right? So we're gonna do this, and then what I generally do, I say to-dos.reducer.js, I say to-dos.actions.js, and generally I have some constants always. So this is almost like you could generate this structure with like Yeoman or something, right? Like a boilerplate, right? So then what I do, I break those things into meaningful things. So whenever I deal with some state, I'm not going through a single flat file of 2 billion different things. So I'm gonna move this thing here. I have this reducer here. I can also kind of break this initial state from inline of being like passed as an argument. So I can say here const initial state, because this is generally can be a lot bigger than just simple example. So you do this. And then generally you don't want to be hard coding those strings because this is very error prone. So what you generally do, you turn those into like constant variables, and then you pass those along instead. And I'm going to explain that in a second. So I'm going to say export const add to do type is add to do. This is a very good practice, so you don't fall into a trap of mistyping this stuff in your app. So const remove to do type is remove to do. And then lastly, I believe for this reducer, we had this. So export const this is this, right? And now we can, instead of passing hard-coded strings along, we can say add to do type, remove to do type, and then toggle completed to do. Why is this important? Well, it's important because we're using the same string in another place as well. We're using it in our actions. So it's very, very important. So let's move those actions to the corresponding file as well. So we go here, we go to the actions, we do pretty much this. And then we also do this add to do type, remove to do type, and then toggle completed to do, right? Why is this important? Like, is this redundant, you might ask? Well, no, not really. Imagine that you wanted to rename your to-do type. It's sufficient now to come here and name it cow, and it's going to propagate to all of the places where add to do type was used. If this wasn't the case, you can already see a space for error, because you might rename your action in one place, and you might forget that that same action type is used in various other places. So you'll always want to do this with this version of Redux, right? Okay, great. So you can see how our main file is getting smaller and smaller, and you can see where we're going with this. So in a second, this is going to be very clean. So we go now to users, and we do the same. We say users.reducer.js. We do this stuff, right? We grab this initial state just as we did in the other reducer initial state. We define it on top here, initial state, right? It's this thing is messing with me, the Copilot thing. I don't know why it does that, but it's incredibly, incredibly annoying. Okay, so we have the initial state, and you can see we have only login for this one, but it doesn't really matter. So what we're going to do, we're going to say constants.js, we're going to say export const login type is login, and then we're going to do the login type, right? That's great. And then we go back to the main file. We need to create the actions as well for the users, right? So we're going to say users.actions.js, and then here we're going to have user login type. Now, before we kind of move from this, you might wonder, Alex, why are you saying users.actions, users.reducers, right? Very simple thing. Whenever you're globally searching, now I can just search for the actions, and I'm going to get all the action files. If I'm interested into reducers and I forgot the name, I can just say reducer, and then I can swap between them. So this is a very nice trick for me personally when it comes to searching for files. Also, if you're writing some regular expressions for some specific tooling or whatever, this can be very handy. Now you could kind of target all of the files that have .reducer in their file name, for example. So the reason is not random. The reason is simply because it does help. To fix this app now, let's go to actually to the app.js, and now we have to kind of fix some of those imports because they're actually no longer true. So let's kind of go somewhere around here, and let's go to add to do. Can we do this? Yes, nice. Login, nice. And I think potentially that should be fine. Let's see, it still seems to be breaking, so we forgot to do's reducer is not defined. Fair enough. So let's go to to index, yeah, and we have to kind of import those two things now as well, right? So let's say import to do's reducer, and then import user reducer. Yeah. And then if we get back to the application, did we mess anything else up? We did. Initial state is not defined. Fair enough. In which reducer is that? Initial state. So it must be we misspelled something here in the users. Yeah, we misspelled that. Beautiful. Okay, let's go back here. Let's log in. Amazing. Can we try adding some stuff? We can, right? I think this kind of gives you a good idea of Redux. what have we done so far? I have explained to you what reducers are for, what actions are for. Then we've created an action creator, we just realized it's a simple function that returns some object. We've learned that no matter with which framework you use, Redux is framework agnostic, meaning you can use it with whatever you want. You need to install the corresponding driver. As you saw, in the context of React, we have installed it with React Redux driver, so we can map it to the React itself. I have left some of the things for you to do. I think this would be a great exercise for you to continue to simply, use the actions that I've already created and then dispatch them from the actual application. So you have remove to do, you have toggle completed to do as well. Before the 1 hour mark, I think we have enough of time. Let's just finalize this. So essentially, as you may notice, React, there's some negatives here, especially with this version of React. It adds some boilerplate. You need to write those actions. You need to have those types. You need to write those reducers, etc., etc., etc. Now, why is this useful, right? Well, it's useful because you can clearly see that you separate for the most part, you separate your application data state from the view. So you can see here, for example, if we go to the app, we have been handling so we're not handling state mutations and stuff inside of the view, inside of the component itself. That is kind of handled somewhere. Here we have explicit kind of map of all of our state changes. So whenever some state in your application changes, you know where to look at. Okay, so I have changed something in relation to to-dos. Data is wrong. Okay, well, I know where to look. So let's see what's happening here. Okay, I can't decipher it. Okay, let's take a look at the Redux devtools. Okay, now I see, because I expected, this action to have text of dog, cat, cow, but it has 232. So the issue is with my input field. You remember how we had undefined here? It's because we weren't passing the actual text that we thought, but Redux devtools literally helped us in 2 seconds to realize, like, hey, why am I not seeing any to-dos when I submit them? Well, because text was actually undefined, right? So essentially, the positive side of Redux is obviously that you separate your state from your application. The negative, obviously, that you can see, there's a lot of boilerplate, there's a lot of code. So if you remember, the Redux state is immutable. So that's why, if you're wondering, like, why are we spreading all of this thing like this? Why do we have to write this like this? Is because you can't and you shouldn't mutate the state in Redux directly, meaning coming here and saying state dot whatever to do is 2. This would break a lot of things. It would introduce side effects in your application. So one of the negative sides of this version of Redux and not Redux Toolkit has solved this, and I might make another video about that. In this version of Redux, or old version of Redux, you do have to keep spreading the state like this, so you accidentally don't mutate it. Now, this logic is very error prone as well, which is why Redux Toolkit for the big part actually exists, is because in Redux Toolkit you kind of write this logic in a kind of mutated way. At least it looks like you're mutating stuff, which you aren't. But still, it makes it a lot less error prone than actually this. I think we're gonna stop here. I think this is sufficient for you now to play with this. Let me know in the comment section if you have any more questions, if I've missed something or whatever. I would obviously be very happy to help out with that. If you have any other suggestions, if something was too fast or too slow, whatever, let me know. And as always, if you like this video, please, like it, share it, comment on it, or whatever, follow my channel. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out and have a great one. Cheers.